Hello, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, is Russian President Vladimir Putin restricting freedom of expression, or is he protecting tradition and culture? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. This is a great subject for our international online audience. What are they saying about what's happening in Russia?
Well, they're all really interested in this topic, and a lot of them are asking whether or not freedom of expression, as you just mentioned at the top of the show, is something that's foreign to Russia. Neslihan, Facebook comments, can true freedom of speech and expression exist in Russia, considering the influence of the communist regime in their past? I think we'll get a lot of pushback from that on the main show, but we want to hear from you, of course, at home. So tweet us your questions and your comments with the hashtag AJStream.
Joining us in the studio, we have Nabil Makel, and Nabil is a professor of political science at George Washington University. He lectures in international relations. Nabil, it is great to have you here on the stream.
Thank you, Femi, for inviting me. Thanks, Malika. You're wonderful.
You're very welcome. We will get you to work a little bit harder in a moment. So now remember, this show is driven by you and your ideas and by you joining in. So if you have an idea or a pitch, you can follow us on Twitter at AJStream and share your story, and it may just wind up on the air.
I'm Lisa Mogolansky. I'm studying economics and I'm in the stream.
When Vladimir Putin returned to the Kremlin to serve a third term as president, he immediately began passing a series of laws that angered many. Critics became even more outraged when last month he passed two more controversial bills. The first bans, I'm going to quote here, gay propaganda, end of quote. And the second is a law that if you break it, you can get up to 1 year in prison for any, I'm going to quote one more time, insult to religious feelings, end of quote. And that was drafted in response to a protest song performed at the altar of the Russian Orthodox Cathedral in Moscow by the punk rock band Pussy Riot. Have a listen to this. Supporters say that President Putin is defending religious traditions and the wishes of the majority. But where does that leave freedom of expression in Russia today? To help us explore this, from New York, we have Andronik Migranyan. He is the director at the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation. That's a think tank dedicated to promoting understanding between Russia and the US. In New York, Rachel Denber is the deputy director at Human Rights Watch. And also in our Google Plus hangout from Moscow, we have activist Igor Yasin. He's an LGBT activist and organizer at the March for Equality campaign. And Russian TV personality Anton Krasovsky also joins us. It's great to have all of you here in the stream. I want to start though with Andronik. Andronik, there's been a whole series of laws that have been passed quite recently since President Putin was inaugurated for the third time. I want to get your take on what's happening in Russia.
I think that everything is developing in a due direction. This is first time in Russian history when we are trying to put in order relations between state and society. Because in Russian history, usually we had either omnipotent state or no state and chaotic situation when all different selfish groups were grabbing everything and doing anything they wanted to do. This is first time when really state is trying to draw the lines, to formulate the behavior of many important actors in society and the state, and to regulate their interrelations. I don't see anything specific in this, but this is a good sign that at least we are not going from one extreme to another extreme. State is there, civil society institutions are developing and working, but state is trying to put them in some frame which is normal for any democratic state and society in the world.
Okay, so when you say selfish groups, who are you actually referring to?
We had in 90s, early 2000s, oligarchs and a lot of others who really used the weakness of state institutions. They privatized state, they grabbed the property, and they practically put themselves outside of law and regulations. That's why the processes which are now going on in Russia, they are healthy processes.
So,
And by the way, all countries, including United States, where we are now, they passed all this way during several hundred years, and still they have a lot to do in this relation, because what we hear every day on every TV channel, it is the problem of interrelations between state and society. How much state we need to have, how much society we need to have. And this is quite normal, because this is always a fight for a new balance, because state wants to be bigger and society wants to be more omnipotent.
okay, let me just bring in Rachel here. Rachel, you heard what Andronik was saying about the idea that Russia is organizing civil society. How do you see the passage of these laws and what it's saying about what's happening in Russia?
Not organizing, but regulating relations between state and civil society.
Thank you for that clarification. Rachel?
I think if we were talking about the period, 2005, 2006, 2007, I would have said yes, it's an effort to regulate relations between state and civil society, more towards control than regulation. I think now we're at a stage where it's beyond regulation. It's control. I think that the Kremlin, I think that if you look at the laws that have been adopted, Kremlin is trying to very, very closely control areas of public life, vast areas of public life, having to do with advocacy on policy issues, having to do with advocacy on environmental issues, having to do with many areas of public speech.
So Rachel, give us an example that you can actually quote that makes us connect on a human level.
Oh, for example, you can't, I think that there's a very, and Andronik, I think you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I think there's a very strong effort underway to stop organizations that get, for example, that both get foreign funding and engage in advocacy to register as something that's called foreign agents, which in Russia really means, it's a Cold War term that means spy. And many people have been saying that, well, look, America also has these laws about foreign agents, but the American law talks about agents of foreign interest. It doesn't say that if you get foreign funding, that means that you're a spy. And so what's happening now is there's a real push to push out some of the organizations that do really top-notch work on fighting torture, top-notch work on exposing corruption, top-notch work on trying to address environmental issues. There's a real effort underway to try to sort of demonize them, make them register as a foreign agent and make them seem very foreign.
Malika.
Nabil, there's clearly a disconnect here, and I think we're seeing it on the show. We're also seeing it online. We asked the question, do these laws limit freedom of expression among ordinary citizens? Lady Rose tweets in, you don't have to be in Russia to answer that. It's a shame we have individuals in government that want to control the people all the time. But then we also got a tweet from Cato who says, no, these laws, not in any way. In fact, they develop nationalism and pride, so they don't limit freedom of expression. So give us your take. How would you grade Putin's leadership?
If I give him a grade, I will give him a B. Sometimes he may be hovering between a B minus and a B plus, but average. However, definitely he is transforming Russia. But let me just stick with the very exact sentences both of you used in your language. You said he is restricting freedom of expression, but he cannot restrict or hamper the expression of freedom, because just the system is so diffused, global communications allow for the transmission of ideas. Also, you said, is Putin acting this way to protect traditions and culture? Nations change, like say America did transform itself, so as Russia. So please do not ignore that aspect. For instance, you showed on the screen the music band playing inside the cathedral, and then there is the promulgation of an insult to religion ban. But in fact, this does not promise the creation of a theocracy or autocracy, because the church in Russia was the first organization to call for the freedom of members of this band, and they were actually campaigning or defended them. As a student of Russian history, the church actually not even was deprived and supervised tightly by the czars and the communists.
Right.
So Putin is not really creating a religious state. The church did defend the freedom of members of that band.
Okay, Anton,
Yes.
you wanted to join in the conversation. There's a story
Yes,
that you wanted to bring that's really important.
I really want to join your conversation, and so fun to hear speeches supporting Mr. Putin from people who lives in America. It's so strange that Anthony, who lives in Russia and works for Russian government in your 90s, now lives in America. It's so strange that Professor at Washington University who lives in America and support Mr. Putin deals and Mr. Putin doings. If you want to know my private opinion about him, he's not a dictator. He's not a Pinochet. He's not even a Filipinian dictator. He's just a president who, I don't know why, decided that he should be president 20 years. And I, as a human being who lived in Russia, not in America, not in Germany, not in Canada, not in Great Britain, I live in Russia, and I don't want to see him as a president of Russia for 20 years. I don't know why. That's it.
Andronic?
Yeah, you know, it's very
I mean,
funny.
your president has an ability to
I'm
stick
not
around for a long
living
time.
in America. I work in America, which is
Sure.
quite
You
normal
live
event.
in Georgia.
First,
You live
second,
in America. You live in Armenia.
you know, it's very funny to listen some people from Moscow. They are sitting in Moscow. They appeared on different international
yeah,
TV
right,
channels,
speaking
and
now.
they consider Putin as a dictator, which means not everything is that bad in Russia as they try to picture if they are sitting there openly criticize Russia's leader and nobody putting them in jail. They don't understand what about they are talking, because in dictatorial societies they'll be immediately in jail. I'm not speaking about, you know, Soviet period or about other authoritarian or dictatorial regimes. This is one problem. And second, you know, if democracy is and I am a professor on theory of democracy, and I know what about I am talking. If democracy is the implementation of the will of nation, I must tell you that all these laws which recently passed through Russian Duma, they were overwhelmingly supported by Russian public at large. And by the way, as far as it concerns Pussy Riot, overwhelming majority demanded more severe punishment for them, because Russian society is more conservative in this sense, and some laws and events which are happening now in Russia, they were commonplace 50 years ago or at the beginning of last century in Great Britain, in America, in other places. You couldn't listen 50 or 60 years ago or 100 years ago about same-sex marriages or adoption the children on behalf of same-sex couples, which could be absurd at that time.
Rachel, I want to jump in here because Rachel, I want you to pick up on something that Andronic just said. He mentioned Pussy Riot.
Hold on one second. Malika, hold on 1 second.
Thanks, Femi.
Andronic, Anton, hold on 1 second. Just take a breath. 1 second, because this conversation has more than 2 people in it. Malika.
And the community is dying to get in.
Yes, let's do that.
Rachel, I want you to pick up on something that Andronic said. Alan here says, justified. Pussy Riot played with fire, and they must suffer the consequences. And that's what Andronic was saying, that some people in Russia do believe that Pussy Riot went too far. On the other hand, Jasmine explains why. She says restrictions have been carefully crafted to muzzle protesters. Putin-led government is working to stifle dissent, and that's echoed by Rob, who says, I suspect that it's the citizens who are used to draconian rule. They're more afraid of chaos than loss of newly acquired democratic rights. So would you agree with that? Is this why people are afraid to go to the streets and show protests? They're afraid of draconian rule.
First, one second about Pussy Riot. It's me, right? You're asking me?
Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, because my video went out. So, I mean, no one's saying that no one's saying that what Pussy Riot did was a wonderful thing, and that no one's saying that shouldn't be somehow, considered under as a misdemeanor or something like that. What I think what people reacted so strongly to was that they're put in jail for that. That should not be a crime. You should not have to pay for that with your freedom. And Malika, I'm sorry, your question was.
Well, the second one was people tweeting in to say why people haven't taken to the streets. They're afraid. It doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with the new laws. Okay, two things. First, the protest. There are still people who go to the streets. Second of all, I think that a very strong message I think that the government is trying to send a very strong message about what it thinks about public protesters through the prosecution of many people who have been gathering for unsanctioned demonstrations, and also by the big trial that's underway right now today in Russia. And let's not forget that Alexei Navalny is going to be sentenced tomorrow. The verdict against him will happen tomorrow. Right.
The second question is, and it goes a little bit to what you said, Andrenik, about how the laws are popular. Andrenik is absolutely right. The polls show that these laws are popular. Russia has a very conservative population, but I would also add that that democracy isn't just about always pandering to what the most conservative sectors of the population want. It also is all about holding up the rule of law and adhering to all of the country's obligations, constitutional obligations and international obligations. And here, Russia is going pretty far afield of its international obligations, both under UN under UN charter, under UN conventions, and also the Council of Europe.
Rachel, I want to bring in one of our other guests, and that's Igor. Igor, I want to specifically ask you about the law banning homosexual propaganda. When you heard about that, how did you react? And that's just passed in the last couple of weeks in Russia.
Well, first of all, I want to reply to Andronik and say that actually one of my friends and one of our activists is in jail, and he has been in jail for almost a year now. And I was arrested several times.
And Igor, can you just tell us what is your friend in jail for, so we just understand why you brought it up?
Just for protesting against this new homophobic law.
Okay.
And as you have already mentioned, that this law is just one of many laws, anti-democratic laws, which have been adopted over the last period of time. So, and this law actually has already affected our lives, of course, and the level of homophobic violence and homophobic attacks has already increased in Russia. So I want to.
There's more of this, so the laws are actually making more violence happen against a group that should be protected. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, I want to say that the government is responsible for this violence, and what they wants to do is just to exploit homophobia, just to maintain power, because last year they saw that their support is not so big, so they had to do something. And
okay. Okay, Igor, you made a really good point. Let me just hear what Andronik has to say about that specific point. Andronik?
This is very clear for us. Under Soviet rule, homosexualism was prosecuted according to criminal law. And in modern Russia, everybody has every right to live as they want to live, when they are not creating problems for the others. If you want to be homosexual or lesbian or I don't know, in some other manifestations, you can do that, but nobody will let you do that when you are trying to convince the others to follow your example, or you create problems for the rest of the people. That's why these rules and these laws are not homophobic. They are just regulating the activities of this non-traditional, groups of population,
and nobody is trying to create
problems for them.
I hear that you say that, but I just want you to hear one.
A furious reaction in Russia when they want to organize, gay pride parades, because
I hear that. Hold on one second, because I really do want you to hear this.
Pride
Andronic, please hold on 1 second.
People, because it's abnormal.
Wow. Okay. Now, I interrupted Andronic's speech to bring you Anton. Anton, you have a very personal story, and I think it's really important for this conversation. Can you share it with us quite briefly about what happened to you on your TV show?
I think it's really important for this conversation, especially for Andronic, who lives in America the last 5 years and didn't know anything about Russian life, and he didn't know anything about Russian life in 20 years. I was a TV host in Russia. I was a manager of Michael Prokhorov presidential campaign, and one time during our Duma, our parliament, discussing this gay law, I told in air that I came out in open air. I told that I'm a gay, and I'm a human being like President Putin and Prime Minister Medvedev and members of our parliament. And I knew that they fired me on the next day, and I was fired. That's it. That's my story. I think I'm not a hero. I done it because all the people all around the world, 80% of the people in the world avoids all the problems, and 20% makes a history.
Right.
And I think then I wanted to be in a 20%. That is.
Sure. I'm just going to drop into the community before we go to the post-show. Malika.
Well, a lot of this, of course, this conversation stems from the freedom of expression, which we mentioned at the top. Michael Wagner on Facebook says, the lack of freedom of expression is one of Russia's traditions, though. And Jordan says, freedom of expression has never been a Russian ideology. They learned many generations ago to keep their mouth shut. Nabil, I'm sure that you disagree in some sense with that it's not endemic to Russia. Explain.
I will put it this.
I would like to step in because, in current Russia, media situation is unbelievably different as you could imagine, as you had some, stereotypes, because the leading Russian newspapers are foreign-owned, like Vedomosti, which is published by Financial Times, Moscow Times, and many others.
What is this?
They are very critical against current authorities and very critical against Putin. Echo Moskvy round the clock is criticizing current government.
All right,
on television,
Andronic, we are at the end of this program. So Andronic, I'm going to ask you to just take a breath 1 second, because we actually are at the end of this program. And we also are still waiting for Nabil's response, which you're going to do in the post-show. We'll get back to Andronic. We're also going to hear why Anton disagrees so violently, and Igor, and also Rachel as well from Human Rights Watch. This conversation has only just got started. It will continue at stream.aljazeera.com. I just have time to tell you about what we're doing tomorrow. How long would you be able to live in a confined space without talking to a single person? Almost 80,000 people in the US are locked up in prisons in solitary confinement, sometimes for decades. Tomorrow we will discuss if this is justice or inhumane torture. That's a conversation for another show. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. You know, there's sometimes on the stream where it takes a little while for a conversation to get started. Now we've definitely got it started. You're watching the online post show. Today we're discussing freedom of expression in Russia following the passage of new laws by President Vladimir Putin. I'm going to get right back to the conversation. Andronik, I need you when we talk just to sometimes pause a little bit, because we have 4 other people that we want to get into the conversation. I know you're very passionate, but can we just pick up? Because I know you needed to interject and we had to get to the end of the show. So just do a little recap. What was the point you were trying to make?
Absolutely prejudiced approach and stereotyped approach that in Russia there is not a freedom of expression, because, as I said, Russian media situation is more complex, and practically all printed media is critical to government, very critical, or absolutely critical. And in television, you have a lot of talk shows where practically every talk show invited foreigners to participate in discussions of Russian internal politics. That's why to say that there is a crackdown on freedom of expression, or there are serious limitations on freedom of expression, is, as I said, using Mark Twain's, or paraphrasing Mark Twain's, the rumors of the death of freedom of expression in Russia are highly exaggerated.
Okay, let me just ask Anton.
Yeah.
What Andronik says, you're sitting, as you pointed out, through this entire conversation in Russia.
It's really funny because I worked for them. I never know that maybe one Russian federal channel makes something against government of Putin. Maybe Andronik knows. Maybe first channel, second channel, maybe NTV channel works against President Putin. Maybe NTV were first channel.
By the way,
sorry, Andronik, can I finish, please?
Channel, first
can you
channel,
stop,
and the main
please?
anchorman, Posner, is always very critical against Putin, against government, against
Andronik,
everybody.
It's so funny. It's so funny. It's so funny to live in 1990s as you live in now. But now in intense. Congratulations.
I am watching Russian television every day.
Are you watching Russian
every
television?
day.
I know.
All right, gentlemen, I feel like I need to break you apart for now. I get your point, Andronik. Anton, I hear where you're coming from. Let's move on a little bit. Malika.
Thank you, Femi. Nabil, I actually want to go back to you because we have another Facebook comment along the same lines, and basically the comment was that freedom of expression has never been a Russian ideology. It's never been a Russian tradition. But then we got this video comment with someone that disagrees with that. I want you to have a listen and then let me know what you think.
Sure. I do think this new law in Russia, providing a prison sentence for anyone who insults religious feelings, is stifling free expression. But a more important point, I think, is for people to realize that it's not somehow a uniquely Russian thing. A lot of people think there's a sort of unique Russian soul that doesn't respect human rights and free speech in the same way that people in the West do. But people should realize, I think, that any government, given the opportunity, may abuse its power, and it's just a question of having the right checks in place.
Which is back, he says this is not a uniquely Russian thing.
I agree, because the thing I object to is the repeated reference to this is a Russian tradition. I mean, we're coming from European, African, Middle Eastern cultures and backgrounds, and traditions basically are defined themselves, they change, and you cannot just stick with some simple notion about this is a cultural norm. So this is refutable, this is wrong. But I am trying to understand Putin's actions, and I put myself as a Russian citizen. Why he wins by a majority that goes over the threshold of 60%.
And why does he?
Because definitely there are enough supporters of him. So even if there are some Russian traditions, basically that does not, like say, restrict him from winning. But also, I believe myself, when people evaluate Putin on different aspects, Femi, they look at the past. Like say, they will say, okay, he's a little bit heavy-handed, but he's not Lenin, he's not Khrushchev, he's not Brezhnev, and definitely he's not Stalin. So he's an autocrat in a very dynamic society. There are those who call for gay rights, there are those who call for more freedom. So it's still a big challenge for him.
And how is he handling that challenge then? Just briefly, because I want to go to Rachel before we end the show. How is he handling that challenge? You're hearing, even amongst Russians, there's discussion and dissent. So standing back from that, looking internationally, how is he handling that challenge?
Oh, in every society, you can see dissent against any law.
I understand
what was happening here against Obamacare. Look what is happening now concerning immigration law.
Andronik, hold on 1 second. How is it, just very briefly, because I really want to get Rachel in.
In one word, he is rejectionist. Like say he's rejecting these demands. But will he change? Will he redefine the agenda for Russian politics and society? That's a big task. So still, the jury is still on. The final verdict has not been rendered on Mr. Putin yet.
Rachel.
I feel like this debate has entered into some real kind of false dichotomies, and I mean, no one's saying that, no one's going to say that Russia's a dictatorship. We're not saying it's the Soviet Union, and also I think that the whole discussion about is this the Russian tradition or not a Russian tradition, that might be interesting, but the urgent thing is discrimination, if it is a Russian tradition, shouldn't be a Russian tradition, and this law on banning non-traditional sexual propaganda is a discriminatory law, and that's the thing that matters. That's what we should be focused on, and that law should be repealed.
Malika.
Great ending note, but I'd like to play this video comment with someone that agrees with what Rachel just said, and he warns what will happen if we don't.
So, in my understanding, the future of Russia really depends on how many people wake up, think about this future, defeat their fears, and decide to show their motivated protest against dictatorship and corruption. If this isn't going to happen soon, I think the situation with human rights will be getting worse and worse here, approaching countries like North Korea or the Soviet Union in Stalin times.
It's a dire warning from Dmitry Komenov, who's actually a member of a pre-Pussy Riot group, street performance art group in Russia.
So I have to thank all of our guests. We've come to the end of this show in the post-show, and I want to thank Nabil Mikhail, Andronik Migranyan, Rachel Demba, Igor Yasin, and Anton Krasovsky. Thank you all very much for giving us a little insight into Russia and what's been happening quite recently there. On the next show, how long would you be able to live in a confined space without talking to a single person? Almost 80,000 people in US prisons are locked up in solitary confinement, and sometimes for decades. Tomorrow we'll discuss if this is justice or inhumane torture. But right now, you know where we will always be at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching.